Today, I'm going to be reviewing this book. It's the last of the series, The Great Mental Models, Volume 4. This one is about economics and art, and I think it's similar kind of to the last one where it has a lot of fluff for sure. And, it talks about like some kind of abstract things like melody and rhythm, and it tries to connect that into like other stuff using it as a metaphor. I don't think it really works. But I'm going to just give you, I only have like a couple takeaways, my big takeaways from it. So I think there was a couple things that were useful, but I think overall I'm not really impressed with this guy's writing because I think there's just a lot of fluff. Pretty much each like section, each idea has like an introduction and a conclusion that are both like, 5 or 6 paragraphs long when I really think you only need like probably like 2 or 3. And so I think a lot of the book could be a lot shorter. But anyway, here's kind of what I took away and I'm just going to share it with you. So one of the really cool quotes that he kind of included in here was something that I think is very relevant today. And it says, having a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention, and it creates a need to allocate that attention efficiently among the overabundance of information sources that might consume it. And I really think this represents, the struggle that a lot of us have in today's world because like we're in a society that's just filled with social media, filled with so much information, right? And it's no longer, it used to be about, okay, how can you find the information? How can you access it, right? Before where there's only books, like you have to go to the library, go try to find the book that you need and then read through that book to get the information you need. Now that you can go on YouTube, you can get so many different things for free. You can ask like AI, all this stuff. So there's so much information. So actually it's becoming the reverse. It's like, how can you limit what kind of information sources? And I think this is something very important. You need to like kind of validate who you listen to and also what kind of stuff you input into your brain, because this now becomes something that's going to mold you over time. Just like how, like friends and stuff will change who you are over time, and it can be for better, for worse. The inputs that you take from online into your brain will change who you are over time. And the inputs into your mind, right, like different books, will also change how you think. So it's very important to kind of notice that, and notice that now our power lies not in finding the information, but in actually deciding what is the right information to pay attention to and learn from. Another cool part that I thought was interesting was about economic bubbles. And I'm just kind of like talking about one thing that he mentioned in this book. So the reason why in economic bubbles, we typically associate people who have no connection to the intelligence behind the bubble. So for example, maybe a gardener or janitor, and we see this as a red flag because this person maybe will start talking about something that's supposed to be relatively complicated, right? So for example, in the dot-com bubble, you would have everyday people who don't really have ties to anything in the internet industry talk a lot about it because it seems like they have a lot of knowledge that they just got out of nowhere, right? And you're like, how on earth did they get this knowledge? How did they become so knowledgeable? And same thing we can say with the AI bubble, right? Like there's a lot of people maybe who have zero knowledge about AI, and they've accumulated a lot of this information in both these situations, right? Both bubbles is mainly just because of the media. So if we think about how information travels through a bubble, what happens is like the founders, the CEOs, the researchers who are responsible for kind of the beginning of this technology advancing, right? Like in AI or even in the internet, they know from a very early on stage that this is very revolutionary, can change a lot of things. And so therefore they have that knowledge, and then it starts to hit, the rest of mainstream society in the sense that it goes to the media outlets, and over a period of like multiple years of just seeing it in the news so much and hearing people talk about it again and again, it finally reaches what we might consider the like lowest parts of society, not in to be like mean or anything, but just the sense of like, in comparison to what is actually like where it started, right? In the sense of the researcher CEOs, these people are the farthest away from that, if you can imagine, right? Because they may do amazing things, but they're just not necessarily connected really close to that. And this could be everyday people, right? It's not only just like, like people who are in manual labor stuff. It could be everyday people who just don't have connection, right? So there's no reason that they should really be talking about it. And the only reason they're talking about it is because there's been so much media coverage and people around them have been talking about it so much. And so it's been said a lot that like, oh, there's a bubble. Like that's how you know there's a bubble when, your gardener is telling you what internet stocks to pick, right? Or what AI stocks to buy, right? Because this signifies a kind of set of time, a period of time that has passed since the initial kind of initial creation or discovery of the technology. And what happens during this kind of shift is that this means that, oh, okay, we know that bubbles are short-lived, and this means that a significant amount of time has passed for this information to reach even the people who have no connection to it at all. And as such, you should be more concerned because this means that now you have people, right? So there's like a lag. For example, like we all know that opportunities come and go, and there's certain, you must strike when the iron is hot, right? That's the kind of wording people use. And so you must enter into an opportunity when the opportunity still exists. But when so much time has passed, we can actually safely say the opportunity no longer exists. And this is what happens is like, these are called retail investors. It's just like average people who buy stocks. What happens is they hear this information, and even though it's been like multiple years, they still act on it as if nothing has changed. But in reality, what has happened is there's been a lot of changes since the time when those, internet CEOs or dot-com bubble CEOs or just AI CEOs, since they started with the technology, there's been major shifts in the industry that happen. I can't talk about all the shifts, but there's just been major changes. And therefore, the fact of whether or not the individual person should buy a stock now, when they've finally like heard about it and have mustered up enough conviction and everybody's talking about it, it suggests that actually this bubble, which has to be short-lived, right? All bubbles are relatively short-lived, has to pop because there's been a significant amount of time that has likely passed before this person hears about this. So I just thought that was a really interesting point. And I think it's just really important to notice that because there's different stages of bubbles, and just like anything in like history, right? It's relatively predictable. You might have ice cream that comes in different flavors. You might get vanilla, you might get chocolate, you might get strawberry, you might get something else, but it's still ice cream, right? And I think that's the biggest thing that we can connect bubbles with, right? There's a bubble of some sort. The exact events may occur differently, but they technically may not always occur in a different order, in the sense that there's going to be a mania phase where everyone goes crazy about it, and then like things pump up really high, then there'll be a fall for sure, right? So those two aspects are always going to happen with the bubble. So it's important to kind of recognize that. Another thing that I took away from this book was the idea of open source intelligence. So it's kind of interesting. They're talking about like different, secret intelligence parts of different governments and how they actually just use a lot of foreign media, let's say like other countries' newspapers and stuff. They just use a lot of available evidence. Yes, they use, other very secret kind of classified information, but they said like 80% of your information is just like the available information like from people in those countries, because as someone in another country, you don't have context. And that's the most like important part, because if you get some information from, let's say, a spy or something, like you need to put that in context of the general like situation, what's happening, so that can actually determine your actions. And I think like, one good example here was he was saying that like, you could use an example. So someone could be paying attention to a foreign newspaper and specifically pay attention to available information about, let's say, opera theater tickets. And this happened during the Allied war bombing effort, right? So they looked at the changes in like the news about opera tickets and opera closings and, different demand, supply availability stuff. And from that, they were able to go backwards and determine how effective the bombing of that kind of area was. And so it's like, really, a lot of information is actually much more connected than we typically think. I think a lot of times most people are not able to see the second to third level deep connections that kind of manipulate things, but it does make sense, right? And this is also why, kind of recessions can occur, because it's all stemming from one change in humans' behavior. Is there becomes a lot of fear, and people are just not sure if there's going to be enough money or they're going to have enough, and that just causes a huge down cycle in everything. Right? So then like that's in a sense predicting an overall, because sometimes you might be like, well, if one person doesn't buy something anymore, how does that change everything? Well, it has a lot of chain reactions, right? And so it's like with this opera ticket example, you're actually going backwards. The bombing is causing these kind of changes that you can see in different aspects of the society. And so it's like you will always have situations where you change something and there will be ripple effects. And so if you can catch those ripple effects, even if you're not sure exactly what was changed, you can go backwards. And I think this is just super important nowadays, right? Because like a lot of people are really lazy in the sense that they don't want to, read books, obviously, but also they don't want to go on the internet and actually look at available information. Let's say it could be to inform a lot of things, right? For example, like where you're going to live later, where you're going to do, like some people may just do very bare basic stuff. Some people may use AI, which is fine, but it's like you can't exclusively use AI, because if you only use AI without actually thinking or making decisions yourself, AI is known to make mistakes, and you're just going to absorb those mistakes and they're going to become part of your life, right? So it's very important to take in information and kind of critically analyze it, in the sense of like, these people who were during the war effort looked at those opera ticket sales and stuff. They didn't just look at those sales. They thought about it in the broader context of what these things can tell them. And so that's an important thing I think we must, pay attention to going forward, is that there's a lot of people in this world with different, incentives, different kind of opinions. And as a result, the information you can get is very difficult to, discern and separate, as to say what's useful, what's not useful. And the only way to kind of get close to doing that is just not taking everything at face value, not just agreeing with everything, and just kind of questioning and developing your own way of just kind of rationalizing stuff. And I think this is really why reading books is important, because one book on its own, right? Like this book, for example, right? It's maybe not the best, but there are definitely things I gained from it. And if I read a bunch of books, the chance that all of them are going to be wrong about everything is very low. The chance that one of them may be like wrong partially about something is pretty high. But by reading a lot of books, you start to get a more informed perspective, and you start to have different parts line up. And when those line up, they kind of reinforce each other. So you know that they're more correct because they've kind of been double verified. And as such, you should kind of have this approach where like, okay, one news source said this. Well, what about an eyewitness account? Do they say the same thing? Do they line up? What about the incentive structure of what I know? Maybe the company CEO wants to project confidence. So I know that could be changing what maybe the news narrative is. So all these things come together, and it's really just a framework for how you should operate in this new age where there's so much information and there's just really an overload. And you have to be more skeptical, and you can't just accept stuff like for what it is. Another really cool thing I thought this book shared was talking about Western civilization, how, as Westerners, we're exclusively and excessively labeling everything in our society in like very binary terms. And this has kind of created a society that thinks in very binary terms. We typically think something has to be or something cannot be. Of course, there's many gray areas in between. And this can be compared to a lot of Eastern cultures, where Eastern cultures, due to kind of early Buddhism, have a more foundational approach with more complex reasoning logic. So the sense of they accept things to be multiple things could be true. None of those things could be true. Right? One of them can be true, one could not be true. So I think it's important to have this level of complex understanding that I've talked about a lot as like kind of being first principles, right? We know nothing in the world can just be absolutely true in every single case, and nothing in the world can not be true in every single case. And so if you ever are at one of those extremes, you know that you're not in the actual reality. And this is why like a bubble can happen. This is why, a lot of people who are in power can abuse it, because they can paint things to be a certain way when they're not, right? Like, for example, nothing can just be purely good. If you have a politician who says something, then they paint it as purely good. You have to know that it is not purely good, and therefore the reality lies in between the two extremes. And so that's one example of a good reasoning framework you can use to approach just stuff that you hear about the news or hear about different opinions, because the truth is nothing is really binary. Right? And the sooner you acknowledge that, the sooner you kind of take control of being able to, more accurately navigate the complexities of this life and this world. So those are all my thoughts about the book. If you have any questions or comments, put them down below and subscribe for more.